Good morning, everyone. I'm Matt Tebow, and I've been designated by Secretary of State Rossana Rosado to serve as the presiding member of this council. This is the first quarter meeting of the Fire Prevention and Building Code Council. First thing we do is establish a quorum, so I'll ask Kevin to run through the roll of all the members.
Matt Tebow.
I'm here.
Ben Keller.
Present.
Michael Weber.
Present.
Vincent Rappaciulo.
I'm here.
Keith Wen.
Here.
Joseph DeStefano.
Present.
Claudia Bramer.
Present.
David Seeley.
Here.
Joseph Toomey.
Here.
Sean Hamlin.
Here.
Timothy DeRusher. Tim DeRusher.
I'm here.
Thank you, Tim. Robert Hughes.
Here.
Patrick Dolan.
Here.
Dominic Marinelli.
Here.
And William Tyne. We don't believe it's here.
I think we have a call on user 3.
All right, Matt, so we have 14 then.
All right, thank you, Kevin. I'll announce Bill if he appears. All right, I'll call the meeting to order and offer a general welcome this morning. First, I want to introduce Mayor Joseph DeStefano of Middletown. He was appointed by Governor Cuomo several weeks ago to serve as the representative of cities under 100,000. Welcome, Mayor. I think I speak for all my colleagues on this council in saying welcome, and I look forward to serving with you. I think you'll offer some great perspective and will help us out a lot. So great to have you.
Thank you so much. It's a pleasure to be on the board and look forward to it.
Matt, I'm just going to jump in quick. I do see Bill just joined in as a attendee, so I'm going to make him a panelist now. And Bill, if you could unmute and let us know that you're here.
I'm here.
Thank you. So we're now we have 15, Matt.
Thank you, Kevin. Okay, so continuing my welcome, well, it's been a year now since we all sat, well, at least the majority of us sat in a room together in Albany with the conference linked to New York City and Buffalo. I don't think I certainly didn't have any idea at the time a year ago that a global pandemic was going to change our society so significantly. I don't think I ever thought that I would be sitting here in my dining room presiding over this meeting. We've lost more than 500,000 of our fellow Americans. It's been a really, really hard year. New York was one of the first and one of the hardest hit states, and thanks to Governor Cuomo's leadership right off the rip, we are weathering the storm. More than 3 million New Yorkers have now been vaccinated with their first dose, so that's exciting. And President Biden is promising that by the end of May, there'll be enough doses and vaccines for every American. So I guess it's with a lot of hope that I say I think our next meeting may be back in person. And I look forward to seeing you all again in that way. But we're still on WebEx one more time, at least one more time. So I'm going to turn it over to Kevin to walk through our normal, procedures while we're in this meeting. Kevin?
As Matt may have already mentioned, due to the coronavirus emergency, the state and federal bans on large meetings or gatherings, and pursuant to Governor Cuomo's Executive Order 202.1 issued on March 12, 2020, and subsequent executive orders issued thereafter, certain provisions of the open meeting laws have been suspended. The governor's executive order provides that public bodies may meet to take such actions as are authorized by the law without permitting the public in-person access to such meetings, and authorizes meetings to be held remotely by conference call, provided that the public has the ability to view or listen to the proceedings and that such meetings are recorded and later transcribed. As a result, today's meeting is being held via WebEx instead of a public meeting open for the public to attend in person. But the public was provided access to register to attend the call, and then the call-in number was provided so that any interested members of the public can listen to the proceedings. Because of these special features, we ask that each Code Council member record their vote individually, both for establishing quorum and on individual items as needed. At this time, everyone's microphone has been muted. Any Code Council member, panelist, or division staff wishing to speak, remember to unmute your microphone, state your full name, and then speak. Anyone from the public wishing to address the Code Council should send a WebEx message to either myself or my co-host, China Clark. We will then collect some information from you, such as your name and address and who you are representing. Thanks, Matt.
Thank you, Kevin. Okay, that moves us to agenda item number 2, which is the draft minutes of the December 4th, 2020 meeting of the council. In your email packets and on the SharePoint, you should have received those a while ago at this point. Is there any discussion or necessary changes to those minutes? Okay, hearing none. May I have a motion to approve the minutes of December 4th, 2020?
Joe Toomey will make the motion.
Second, Don Marinelli.
Joe Toomey makes the motion. Dominic Marinelli seconds it. This is a voice vote, so all in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Are there any?
I'll
Are
abstain
there
since
any
I wasn't
opposed?
at the meeting.
Thanks, Mayor. Are there any opposed? Okay, hearing none. The motion carries and the minutes of December 4th, 2020 are adopted. I'm noting, as the mayor did, that Mayor Joe DeStefano abstains because he was not present at that meeting. Thank you all. Moving to agenda item number 3. This is the Town of Bedford. It's a more restrictive energy code standard. It's filing local law number 2 of 2021 under Energy Law 11-109. I'm going to kick to Emma Gonzalez-Landers from our staff to handle the presentation. Emma.
Thank you, Matt. Good morning. Can everyone hear me okay?
We
Thanks.
can.
For the benefit of new members, Energy Law Section 11-109 requires any municipality that adopts a local energy conservation code to file a copy of that code with the Code Council. If that copy is filed within 30 days after promulgation or adoption, the municipality may enforce that local energy conservation code until and unless the Code Council determines that the local energy code as a whole is not more restrictive than the state energy code. On the other hand, if not filed within that 30-day period, then the municipality may not enforce such law until and unless the Code Council determines that the local energy code is more restrictive than the state energy code. The New York State Energy Research and Development Authority, otherwise known as NYSERDA, is the developer of the New York State Stretch Code. At the Code Council meeting of July 10th, 2020, Marilyn Dare, speaking for NYSERDA, stated that the New York Stretch was developed as a readily adoptable local energy code. It is an overlay to the state energy code, following the same format and requiring more efficient energy conservation measures than the currently effective version of the energy code. And fast forward to February 18th, 2021, the Division of Building Standards and Codes received a filing of a more restrictive local energy conservation code from the town of Bedford. Local Law number 2 of 2021 adopted a local energy conservation construction code and replaces the existing town energy code previously in effect. The filing was submitted by the town supervisor within 30 days of adoption of the local law. And the filing included a description of the local energy code, a copy of the stretch code, which is based on, and the local amendments, Also a summary of the stringency analysis of the stretch code compared to the state energy conservation construction code. The complete filing package was shared with Code Council members prior to this meeting. Based on a review of the filing, the local energy conservation code adopts NYSERDA's stretch code with several additional more restrictive modifications, as was noted on Exhibit A of the filing and summarized as follows. For commercial compliance alternatives, the local energy code requires a ComCheck analysis if following either the prescriptive path of the Energy Conservation Construction Code of New York State or the prescriptive path of ASHRAE 90.1. The local code requires third-party plan reviews and third-party site inspections if following either the ASHRAE 90.1 Section 11 Energy Cost Budget Method or the ASHRAE, and for the transcriber, that's ASHRAE 90.1 Appendix G Performance Rating Method. Residential compliance restricts new and substantially renovated residential buildings to follow the Energy Rating Index, or ERI, path of Section R406 of the Energy Code. Based on an evaluation of the filing and the presentation made by NYSERDA at the July 10th, 2021 meeting, the division recommends that the Code Council determine that the Town of Bedford's local energy conservation code is more restrictive than the currently effective version of the New York State Energy Conservation Construction Code. Thank you.
Thanks, Emma. Kevin, I'm correct that no one from the town is here to present today, correct?
Correct. They did not let me know that they would be here, and I don't recognize a name on the attendees list.
Great, thank you. Emma, quickly, I just want to clarify that the pieces that are more restrictive than the stretch code are also more restrictive than the energy code as currently adopted.
Yes, that's a good point, Matt. They are more stringent than both the stretch code and the state energy code.
Okay, and there are no provisions that are less restrictive than the state energy code.
That is correct.
Great, thank you. Are there is there any other discussion from members, questions of Emma, et cetera?
Mr. Chair, just a clarification. Is there severability in the proposed code? Meaning, if we're to rule that it's more restrictive, would the provisions that aren't more restrictive still remain intact?
I'm not sure I fully understood the question. I don't believe there are any provisions in there that are not more restrictive.
Oh, I'm sorry. My understanding was they had advanced provisions in the stretch code, but then there were additional provisions in the town code that were more restrictive, but some in the town's energy code, which was the stretch code, that were aligned with the stretch code approved last year. Perhaps I'm not wording that correctly, but I just want to be clear if we're ruling on the entire proposed building code or just certain provisions that are more restrictive.
So this would be a vote to look at local law number 2, which includes the stretch code and the additional more restrictive provisions that the town added within local law number 2.
Thank you.
Thanks, Dave. Any other questions or discussion points? Okay, hearing none, as is our custom, I will make the motion through council on this because we like to get the wording right. So I kick it to Peniota to read the motion on my behalf. Go ahead.
Good morning. Motion for consideration on February 2nd, 2021, the town of Bedford adopted local law number 2 of 2021, which amended the town of Bedford Town Code the town code, to adopt the Bedford Energy Code, which includes the New York Stretch Energy Code 2020, New York Stretch, and several additional more restrictive energy provisions. The local law was filed with the Department of State's State Record Unit pursuant to the Municipal Home Rule Law on February 12, 2021. On February 18, 2021, less than 30 days after the adoption of Local Law Number 2 of 2021, the town filed a copy of Local Law Number 2 of 2021 with the Department of State for the Code Council's review pursuant to Subdivision 2 of Section 11-109 of the Energy Law. On July 2nd, 2020, NYSERDA presented to the Code Council a report indicating that New York Stretch is more restrictive than the currently effective version of the New York State Energy Conservation Construction Code, the New York State Energy Code. I move that the Code Council determine, pursuant to Subdivision 2 of Section 11-109 of the Energy Law, that the Town of Bedford's Local Energy Conservation Construction Code, as amended by Local Law Number 2 of 2021, is more restrictive than the currently effective version of the New York State Energy Code. So moved.
Thank you, Peniota. May I have a second for that motion?
Ben Keller, I second that.
Ben Keller seconds the motion. Thank you, Ben. Is there any discussion or questions on the motion? All right, hearing none, this requires a roll call vote. So, Kevin, if you'll please read the roll.
Matt Tebow,
I vote yes.
Ben Keller,
I vote yes.
Michael Weber,
Yes.
Vincent Rappaciulo,
Yes.
Keith Wen,
Yeah.
Joseph DeStefano,
Yes.
David Seeley,
Yes.
Claudia Bramer,
Yes.
Joseph Toomey,
Yes.
Sean Hamlin,
Yes.
Timothy DeRuscher,
Yes.
Robert Hughes,
Yes.
William Kine,
Yes.
Patrick Dolan,
Yes.
Dominic Marinelli,
Yes.
unanimous at 15.
Thank you, Kevin. The motion carries unanimously. If you will please contact the town of Bedford and let them know that we have approved their more restrictive local energy standard. Moving to agenda item number 4. This is the uniform code provisions for rail stations, something that everyone should have seen about 2 to 3 weeks ago before we went into a notice of rule and development that was on our website. So I will kick to Kevin to give us the short narrative, and then we'll move forward from there. Kevin?
Thanks, Matt. So the purpose of this rulemaking is to amend the Uniform Code to include certain specific provisions in relation to the construction, alteration, relocation, enlargement, replacement, repair of equipment and use and occupancy, location, maintenance, and removal and demolition of rail stations. Rail stations are unique structures within the Uniform Code in that many building occupants enter rail stations by train equipment that was boarded in a different location. Upon disembarking the train equipment, the occupant has entered the building but is immediately unfamiliar with the building's layout, having not entered the building through a means of egress element. Should an emergency event occur, an occupant's first thoughts are generally to exit a building via the same route they entered it, which in the case of rail stations is typically not an option. This provides for a different type of experience for rail station occupants than most other building occupants, necessitating the need for specialized provisions for rail stations. The current version of the Uniform Code does not include specific provisions tailored to address the unique nature of rail stations. Many rail stations in the state would be considered underground buildings under the current Uniform Code. Underground buildings pose specific hazards and design complications which complying with other provisions of the Uniform Code, resulting in Section 405 of the 2020 Building Code of New York State having requirements specific to underground buildings. This section addresses topics such as automatic sprinkler systems, compartmentation, smoke control systems, fire alarm systems, standby and emergency power, and standpipe systems. However, Section 405.1 specifically exempts fixed guideway transit systems from the specific requirements for underground buildings. Therefore, although the Uniform Code recognizes underground buildings require special consideration, rail stations on fixed guideway transit systems would be exempt from the typical underground buildings provision, leaving rail stations without the necessary specific provisions to address their unique nature. This has historically resulted in numerous variance applications to the Department of State Boards of Review. Nfpa 130, the standard for fixed guideway transit and passenger rail systems, is published by the National Fire Protection Association, who is globally recognized for developing standards related to fire, electrical, and related hazards. Nfpa 130 is the recognized standard that specifies fire protection and life safety requirements for underground, surface, and elevated fixed guideway transit and passenger rail systems. Particularly, it addresses the uniqueness of rail stations by providing for the safety of rail station occupants through design requirements, including specific provisions for fire alarm and sprinkler systems, standpipe systems, fire separation and fire rated construction, smoke control systems, and emergency communication and evacuation. Accordingly, Board of Review variance decisions and mitigating criteria relied heavily on the use of various parts of Nfpa 130 to address the complications over the direct application of the current and past versions of the Uniform Code to rail stations, and specific challenges for providing for accessible entrances, fire safety improvements, and construction limitations within existing rail stations. Therefore, the proposed rule would incorporate by reference Nfpa 130 and also make the necessary modifications, including the typical mitigating criteria as applicable from past Board of Review decisions. As defined within the rule, the provisions only apply to rail stations serving passengers on fixed guideway transit and passenger rail systems, which by definition are for the movement of passengers within and between metropolitan areas. This would mean the provisions do not apply to systems utilized specifically for other uses, such as systems used for tourism, scenic, historic, or excursion operations, conventional freight systems, or circus trains. Stations not meeting the specific definition of rail stations generally do not contain the same unique hazards and would therefore be able to comply with all other provisions of the Uniform Code. This aligns with the scope of Nfpa 130, which specifically states the standard does not cover requirements for these other types of rail systems. As talked about previously, incorporation of the publication Uniform Code provisions for rail stations and the standard Nfpa 130 in this proposed rule is a compilation of the approved variances into specific technical requirements for rail stations. This proposed rule will reduce the duplication of effort on both the regulated parties and the Department of State from deliberating and completing the variance process for technical topics that have been previously approved on multiple occasions by Department of State Boards of Review. It will also solidify the necessary technical provisions specific to rail stations to ensure all people of the state are protected from hazards of fire and inadequate building construction resulting from the uniqueness of rail stations. So I have Dan Nichols here with us today, and Mr. Nichols is a fire protection engineer from the Metropolitan Transportation Authority, and he oversees fire, ADA, and code compliance for the MTA construction and development. This rule primarily affects buildings that are in the custody of MTA and its affiliated agencies. The division worked closely with Mr. Nichols and the MTA to develop this proposed rule, and he is available to answer any technical questions the council may have concerning the proposed rule. Last month, the division also posted a notice of rule and development on the department's website and via the Building New York e-bulletin to invite public participation in the rule development process, and we have received positive feedback in support of this rule. Similarly, MTA reached out to entities that could be potentially impacted by this rule. So with that, Matt, I would turn it over to Dan to give a presentation from MTA.
Dan, welcome. Dan is a distinguished alumnus of the Codes Division and a well-trusted friend of the division. So, Dan.
Thank you, Chairman Tebow. Good morning. Is my audio okay?
Sounds good.
Okay, great. Good morning, Chairman Tebow and members of the Code Council. My name is Daniel Nichols, and I'm here today to support the proposed rulemaking to amend the Uniform Fire Prevention and Building Code as it applies to rail stations. I'm currently assigned to oversee the fire, ADA, and code compliance programs for the MTA Construction and Development Company, an agency of the Metropolitan Transportation Authority that oversees and administers the MTA capital plan. This plan is all-encompassing of the agencies of MTA, including the Great Metro-North Railroad, the Long Island Railroad, New York City Transit, MTA Bus, MTA Bridge and Tunnels, and the Staten Island Railway. As a state agency designated as a construction permitting agency of the Secretary of State, my office is responsible for administrating the code compliance program for the capital plan. As Mr. Dirk Clark explained, rail stations are unique types of structures and buildings that are regulated by the Uniform Code. Since the first regulations were put in place by the Secretary of State in 1990 for state agencies to conform with the code, the MTA agencies have applied for several hundred code variances on all sorts of topics. Since 2003, when this council adopted a uniform code based upon the International Code Council model codes, the MTA has been granted 203 separate variances under the provisions of 19 NICR Part 1205. The need for so many variances is in of itself a significant enough reason to seek modifications to the Uniform Code. The variance process has led to inconsistent need for alternatives or allow for omissions when applying for a variance to similar Uniform Code requirements. From a cost standpoint, it is estimated that the application of variances has cost the MTA agencies approximately $1.52 million in just staff time for the Code Compliance Office, and does not take into account technical staff, Department of State costs to administer the variance program, or the delays of projects due to the length of time a variance sometimes takes to be heard and potentially approved. To address this issue, the Uniform Code provisions for rail stations, otherwise known as the publication, has been proposed. The proposed rulemaking has been created with a narrow scope of only containing topics, requirements, and conditions found in the variances granted from 2003 that were granted by either the Regional Board of Review or through the administrative variance process by the Department of State. Each proposed provision can be tied directly to one or more granted variances. In this preparation, the provisions for each technical topic were formatted to match up with Uniform Code language and, in cases of conflicts between different variances, were correlated to match the most direct application given by the variance decisions. For new stations, a major focus of the publication is the use of Nfpa 130, the standard for fixed guideway transit and passenger rail systems published by Nfpa. This document is proposed for use in constructing new rail stations and uses an approach to fire and life safety that is more performance-based. It takes into consideration the dynamic changes to occupant loading, the fire performance of building materials, and the contribution of ventilation systems to providing a safe egress situation. Nfpa 130 is the recognized standard within the transportation industry and has been previously utilized on projects within the MTA, like the 2nd Avenue Subway, Fulton Street Transit Center, the 7-line extension for New York City Transit, and the current Penn Station Access Project, bringing Metro North New Haven Line customers to Pennsylvania Station. The increased cost of design is offset by the allowances within NFPA for open stairways and targeted fire protection systems. However, NFPA 130 is primarily addressing fire life safety issues and is not completely inclusive of the topics within the Uniform Code. Therefore, this publication before you does have supplemental language that modifies the requirements of NFPA 130 to closely match all topics of the Uniform Code. Specific items that are addressed by this publication is requirements for accessible means of egress, acknowledgement of existing communication infrastructure for fire system interaction with the transportation control centers, and building construction classifications that meet the Uniform Code designations. We have also performed outreach to local jurisdictions and other state agencies that currently regulate rail stations by circulating a notice of rule and development to each one of them directly and requesting any comments to be forwarded along. Additionally, our office circulated a draft of rail station provisions prior to the final draft that you see to the City of New York Department of Buildings to get their comment as well. I want to thank Assistant Commissioner Keith Wen and his staff for their assistance in the review. Finally, I would like to conclude my comments by acknowledging the Department of State, General Counsel's Office, and the Division of Building Standards and Code staff on their extraordinary effort in preparing this rulemaking and publication. Thank you for your time, and I yield to this chair for questions.
Thanks, Dan. As the Deputy Secretary that oversees the variance process of the department, I will stand witness to the fact that, especially over the last few years, this has really been like trying to fit a square peg in a round hole. I sat in on meetings of the Hudson Valley Board, which is the primary board to handle these cases that MTA has submitted, and it is difficult without a specific rail station provision for them to try and wend their way through that variance process. So I also applaud the staff and Dan. They really did go through a Herculean effort over the last 3 months to get this thing ready. And I hope that the board agrees to conceptual approval today and that we adopt it in late June. So with that, I will turn it over to any other board member that wants to, has a discussion point or has a question for either Kevin or Dan.
Matt, this is Ben Keller. I have a few questions.
Sure, Ben, fire away.
One of the questions I had was related to the NFPA standards, the additions in particular that are referenced in NFPA 130, and not all of them align with our current code. Do you foresee any issues, Dan, with that regarding the design professionals working in several different versions of some of the standards, for example, NFPA 13, during design and construction that may be confusing with our current accepted code?
Thank you, Chief. Good morning. We did an exhaustive effort to make the comparison how it applies specifically to rail stations, and we found no substantial differences. The reason we did move in that direction is that for those who are familiar with NFPA 130, when you get outside of the specific window for the dynamic egress design as an example, it then refers to the local building code or other codes, air quotes, which could be in states that use the life safety code or other building codes. That would be the connection. Since there's a direct connection there to the uniform code, it was the decision that the best way to correlate to ensure that we didn't have as big of a delta is to go back to the uniform code provisions to ensure consistency.
Great. One of the other questions I had was there's a reference to a tie back to occupancy type. One of the examples, section 907 of the building code with the fire alarm systems. My assumption would be the occupancy type that you're considering is assembly type A3, correct?
For the public portions, A3, and then there are back of house locations that are non-public locations where many features happen, and in that case, you would most appropriately put the occupancy type there to address the additional fire protection needs of those spaces.
And lastly, I had noticed there's several other states that have adopted similar provisions using the NFPA standard. Do we have any idea as to why ICC specifically exempts those facilities and why they're not covered at all in the standards from ICC?
So since the original draft of the International Building Code, which was first published in 2000, and which this board adopted with the 2002 supplement document for those who've been around for a while, this exception has always been there as fixed guideway transit. The title of NFPA 130 changed in 2010-ish. Okay, I don't have a specific date to put in the record, where it fixed guideway transit systems were inclusive at the time of adoption of the 2000 IBC, include the passenger rail. So the intent is that the exception reads right now fixed guideway transit. It also means passenger rail. It has always exempted it mainly because the underground provisions, 30 foot or below, could never be achieved with an open tunnel system or commonly known as a trainway. They've always been exempted. Even the commentary has never gone as far as to reference to 130. It just references other nationally recognized design standards. So it's never really got there. And we have considered putting in a 130 code change proposal to ICC. MTA has done so in the past. It has been rejected because of the correlation issues that you'll see within this publication to make it all fit nice.
Thanks, Dan. Those are all the questions that I had.
Thank you, Chief.
Chairman, I have a
Thanks,
question.
Dan. Thanks, Ben.
This is Claudia Bramer.
Morning, Claudia.
Good morning.
Claudia. Fire away.
Okay, I'll fire away and then whoever can answer. They're pretty basic questions. I'm trying to understand the applicability. So this is for all rail stations throughout the state, correct? And for new stations, they would have to comply with the requirements for new design and construction. And then existing stations are just whenever they do upgrades or repairs or maintenance, these new regulations would kick into place. If that's correct, if someone can confirm that for me. And then the next steps, where are we going from here? How does this, when you said about the conceptual, I didn't realize there was another, is there another layer of regulations to what we're going to be looking at? Or is this 21-page document what we're moving forward with today? Thank you.
So Dan, I can answer.
I'm gonna let you guys go ahead.
So as far as the applicability goes, you're correct. There's an existing building provision as well as a new building provision, and they're split up as to what you would have to do when. There are a very few number of fire code type provisions that would apply. I guess you would call them retroactively to existing buildings, but it's a very select number of things in there. And this document here, again, was the focus of it is to cover the previously approved variances that are typical of MTA. So that's the idea within this document, is to specifically tackle those items, and that's it.
But Kevin, it covers, just to Claudia's question, it covers all rail stations in the state, right?
Sorry, yes, and it does cover anything that would meet the definition of a rail station, which by definition does exclude certain types of things that you may think is a rail station, but by definition is excluded.
Okay.
Thanks, Kevin.
Thank
you. To Claudia, to your second question, Claudia, I'll take that. So this is when we have to amend the code. Typically, what we do is we bring it before we go to a notice of proposed rulemaking, because the power of rulemaking is housed in this. It's a little different than sort of the normal way. It's housed within this body. So we seek what we call conceptual approval from this body to grant basically Kevin the authority to file a notice of proposed rulemaking in an upcoming register. Then it goes through the normal SAFA process, and then we have to adopt it usually at the next meeting. And I think we're setting up so that we would do that. Typically, conceptual approval is typically less formal. It's usually a voice vote. We're going to do it by roll call today just because of the medium that we're in. But the real action comes in June at our next meeting when we vote to adopt it. That helps. With regard to, I think your question kind of touched a little further. Is there future actions beyond what we have in front of us today and what we will be voting on today and at the next meeting? I think there probably is. That's something Dan is working on with the staff. But this is the first nut that we're trying to work through to, as Kevin pointed out, deal with the 203 separate variances that the MTA has had to seek over the last 20 to 30 years. Basically, we have a code that doesn't well handle rail stations at this point. So we're trying to deal with that, and this is the first step.
Okay, thank you. I saw that there were comments, and it seemed like, so I was wondering where we are in that process. I was like, did I miss something? But the comments seem like most people are support, at least whoever these people were that commented are in support of these changes. But we'll go back out again with the notice of the proposed rulemaking, and we'll get more comments, and then we'll come back to us. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So codes Codes has had this process for, well, longer than I've been around, and that actually says something at this point. But Codes has this process where they do an informal notice of a rule in development where, it's like I said, it's very informal. It's not the SAPA process. It's, we send it to, the department sends it to you guys for a look, and then we put it out on the web as a notice of rule in development, just to get a sense, maybe head off some problems that we might find during a notice of proposed rulemaking in the formal process. So they've done that. That's where we get the comments from. They put it out. As Kevin said, generally those comments were positive, and now this is basically the start of the formal rulemaking process. We seek your approval, your conceptual approval, and then we go forward the normal way. Are there any other questions, comments, et cetera?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, this is Tim DeRucci. I just have a quick, brief question for Mr. Nichols.
Sure, Tim.
Knowing that NFPA 130 is primarily a performance-based document, in other words, it's not necessarily prescriptive as we would see in our ICC adopted amended codes, are any of the amendments, the changes that are proposed, taking away the ability to use the performance-based features in NFPA 130 so that you can have the appropriate design professionals and authorities having jurisdiction review and do options rather than prescriptive? Is any of that being taken out of 130?
No. Those, in fact, one of the enhancements or enhancements, it is an enhancement of the document, is to greater expand the variables that are the inputs to designing the occupant load to be based upon items such as combining proposed occupant load calculations due to proposed ridership, as well as combining that when you combine it with a large assembly location, such as our Atlantic terminal. So when the Nets game releases into the situation, it accounts for that occupant load. So we have just added additional variables to consider, but we have not removed the performance-based aspect of calculating.
Okay, thank you. And then just a comment then, would you agree or disagree that this then provides more detailed and more realistic protection features based upon 130 rather than following prescriptive provisions that were attempted before?
I would agree with that statement.
Okay, thank you. That's all I have, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Tim. Is there any other comments, discussion points?
If I may ask a question?
Sure, Michael Weber.
Yep. Just what is in a little more about what's included in the scope of what is a rail station. So I understand MTA stations across the, but I'll give an example. So like in Buffalo, right, the Nfpa rails, the outdoor stations there, right? Is that a rail station? Like.
So great question, because so obviously you know what MTA does.
Right.
You know what we have, subways and commuter trains. Specific targeted identification that we did for reach out. Our first was the Niagara Frontier Transit Authority, where they do have underground spaces that have train platforms that then have elevators, escalators, stairways that bring you to street level to the outdoors. They also have above grade, and above grade would be close to grade or above grade, such as a high level platform, which in train speak means that you don't walk down a set of stairs on the train to get to the ground. You walk out a door and then to a platform and then you go down. This would apply for that. And we utilize that model more often in new design, such as our Penn Station Access project, where it's basically a big concrete deck that just so happens to have a train pull up to it. You know, that NFPA 130 would apply there to ensure that there's a safe path to go off, as well as the additional modifications to ensure that all of the pieces of the uniform code, accessible routes, fixtures, emergency lighting, and those other pieces are all included.
Okay. And just, I'm sorry, just one other question from it.
Sure.
Something like the air train to JFK.
Yes.
Would be
Air train. Yes, it would.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you, Michael. Anybody else?
Mr. Chair, this is Keith Wen. I want to make a quick comment.
Morning, Keith.
Hi. So I just want to say a few words about this project here, because I want to say thanks to Dan Nichols for his proactive approach of reaching out to New York City DOB, and we actually had a chance to review the entire thing in details, and also provided some comments. And I really appreciate his attention to every one of those comments and make any necessary changes to the draft. So I really appreciate his effort in coordinating with New York City. I think going forward, if there's anything else that Dan would need, feel free to reach out to New York. Thank you.
Thank you, Keith. Is there any other comments? Okay, hearing none, I'm going to make a motion to seek conceptual approval from the Code Council to proceed with a notice of proposed rulemaking with regard to the rail stations piece that's in front of you now. May I have a second of that motion?
Second, Don Marinelli.
I heard Bill Tyne and Dominic Marinelli second that. Now, as I said, typically we would just have a voice vote here, but because we're on this WebEx medium, I think it would probably be best if we just ran through the roll call. So Kevin, please call the roll.
Matt Tebow.
I vote yes on conceptual approval.
Ben Keller.
I vote yes.
Michael Weber.
Yes.
Vincent Rapatullo.
Yes.
Keith Wen.
Yes.
Joseph DeStefano.
Yes.
David Seeley.
Yes.
Claudia Bramer.
Yes.
Joseph Toomey.
Yes.
Sean Hamlin.
Yes.
Timothy DeRusher.
Yes.
Robert Hughes.
Yes.
William Tyne.
Yes.
Patrick Dolan.
Yes.
Dominic Marinelli.
Yes.
Unanimous at 15, Matt.
Thank you, Kevin. Kevin, you are granted conceptual approval by the council to file a notice of proposed rulemaking based on the draft that we have in front of us today before the next meeting, hopefully in the next couple of weeks, so that we get through the typical SAPA process in time. The goal will be to vote on adoption of this piece at the June 25th meeting. Thank you. Okay, moving on to agenda item number 5. Mr. Dario has been very quiet up till now, so we're going to let him talk for a little bit. It's the director's update. John, fire away.
Are you on mute, John?
Sorry about that. Good morning. I just want to start off by thanking MTA in New York City and the Co-Development Unit and Council for all the work they did on that proposed rulemaking. They really did an amazing job, and it was they put a lot of work into that, so I can vouch for that. But thank you. And again, I just want to update everybody on a few things that we discussed last meeting. A couple of things were as far as training. We've actually scheduled the basic training and the continuing education training, and it's all online right now. We're doing them as webinars. Right now, we got for some of the training events, and usually we've got different courses scheduled for continuing education. We have on some of them at least 1,500 people signed up for those events. So that is a large amount of the code enforcement officials, within the state. So they're doing an amazing job, and they keep improving the process, and hopefully, things will keep improving. But right now, it's working great. So we are looking at different ways of offering the training, but so far it's been working really nicely. So the other thing that I talked about last time was about the Climate Leadership and Community Protection Act, which was the plan signed into law to address climate change and net zero. There is a energy efficiency and housing advisory panel, which will make recommendations to the Climate Action Council. So Kevin, Emma, and I sit on the work group that supports that panel. And obviously the main goal for that is they want to establish a schedule to phase out fossil fuel use in buildings. So potential recommendations, and these are available on the NYSERDA website, and they've had some public comment periods, and I believe they may continue to do that. But at this point, some of the recommendations are obviously to improve energy efficiency and resiliency of buildings. They've recommending that we adopt the stretch code statewide. And it's not the current version that we're looking at. It's potentially the 2023 stretch code. So that is in the process of being developed in early stages. But we are talking to NYSERDA about that and looking at that. And we will actually have some staff members that will participate in the development of that stretch code. Also, they're looking at recommending energy benchmarking for large buildings, similar to Code Rule 97 in New York City. They're looking at energy disclosures at the sale of buildings for residential and commercial, looking at a program for third-party inspectors for energy code to help municipalities out in enforcing the energy code. And then there's a lot of discussions on financing and incentives on how this will all play out. Anyway, though there's a lot of things there. So I think looking at that, some things may impact the codes division, the codes itself, but we don't know the specifics at this point. It's basically they're looking at the recommendations, and they will offer that to the Climate Action Committee. Refrigerants, we talked about that last time. There are proposals to the 2021 code. We will follow those and keep on top of those. We have been talking to different interested parties on that, and potentially that will be finalized at the end of 2021 with the current ICC code process. Got some good news as far as some of the appointments by the division staff. China Clark was appointed to the National Pandemic, or actually I can't say national, it's an international pandemic task force. So that task force will be looking at pandemic issues related to the code, and also providing advisory documents to help support building departments and states. Emma in China also got appointed to a technical advisory committee for residential, for the residential code. Kevin Doer-Clark got appointed to as an alternate to the IEBC committee. And then Brian got appointed, and I believe he's the chair of the Sustainable Energy Action Committee, also for ICC. So that's really good news that we're staying active in that arena. So, and again, I mentioned this before. We had, I guess the final number was about 23 proposals that we've got into the 2021 codes. So we will, stay on top of that. Those are the hearings that will be heard in the coming months. And it's actually being held virtually. And then on the ICC front, I don't know if everybody's heard, but that there was some issues with the ICC development process. So the board for ICC did vote, and that will no longer be a government consensus process. It will be a standards process. And I mean, the big impact there, they've promised that they're going to stay on the 3-year cycle so that the code will be updated with all the others. But the process will be different. It won't, I guess the details haven't been all worked out, but it won't include the same process that we see for the IBC or the IFC. So it will be a different process on that. And I know Dottie from ICC, and I don't want to put you on the spot, Dottie, but I don't know if you've got any more information on that, because that's just happened, I believe, the day before yesterday. So, Dottie, are you?
Yes, I'm on the line.
Okay, I don't mean to put you on the spot. Hi.
Oh, no, of course not. Hi, Mr. Director and Chairman and members of the council. Yes, as John has just mentioned, you can imagine this was certainly controversial, but it will be following the standard development process, which thankfully still is a very balanced process where you have 1/3 of the members are still representing code enforcement, so your governmental members, but it is a committee-based process versus, as John mentioned, the governmental consensus process where that final vote is reserved for the governmental members. This is going to be strictly committee-based. I think the goal will be, and there is a lot of information on the website, and they're really going to try to keep this, of course, as transparent as possible. As you can imagine, so many people are very interested. But the goal is so that they can pivot faster if need be. You heard John mention how New York is taking such an active role when it comes to energy efficiency issues, and they want to be able to maybe dig a little deeper when it comes to this code in general, so it can be responsive to communities that want to take it further. Of course, you're hearing net zero, EV charging, things such as that. So I will continue to keep, of course, the division, as well as anybody who has any interest, posted on any details. But there is quite a bit of information that will be released. Please be watching, though. There will be a call for committee. And so since the 2024 process is beginning now, we had announced committees, as John just mentioned. I'm so happy to see so many representatives from the department on those committees. But we will want to make sure that they'll do a new call for committees for this particular committee. So please be watching. I would love to also see New York at that table as well. So, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Okay, thanks, Dottie.
Of course.
Yeah, and in regards to that, I mean, if we are looking at the stretch code, obviously the stretch code is an overlay to the IECC, so we would still be looking at modifications. It really would depend on what got incorporated into the next version of the IECC. That's all I have, unless there's questions.
Thanks, John. I mean, I'll just put a point on what John and Dottie were saying just now. We have, from what I've seen from the panel that John's been working on and what I'm hearing, I think this council is going to have a pretty significant amount of work over the next 5 to 10 years in the energy realm. So I guess we're all going to have to become expert in the energy area as we move forward. That of course is overlaid with adoption of the uniform code, the energy code, and more restrictive local standards that we're seeing. Although hopefully, as we pick up some of this material, we won't have as many MRLSs that have to be adopted. I think the code itself, I think that ICC will hopefully, especially with a lot of New York input and perhaps some of the other more progressive states, the ICC itself will take us a good way into the future on a lot of these pieces, and with hope we won't have a lot of New York changes. So maybe we won't have a lot of work, but I think we stand ready just in case we do. Are there any other questions, comments, etc., for John or Dottie before we move to the next agenda item? Okay. Hearing none, agenda item 6 is the work group update. Before Kevin dives in, I want to take a moment to thank all the members of our working group, this council's working group, for the extra time that they put in over the last year. I think we formed it a year ago, and they've met just about every month since then, and they are working diligently to put together some really good information for the whole council to consider with regard to potential changes to the 2020 New York codes. Your expertise and your time are really greatly appreciated by me and the secretary, and certainly the staff that you're working with. So, Kevin.
Yes, thank you, Matt. So we did meet 2 times since the last code council meeting, and we focused on 2 topics, one being the performance code and the other being townhouse sprinklers. And we intend to meet probably April and May to continue our discussion around townhouse sprinklers. And then the following months after that, we'll work diligently on putting together a summary document of all 13 items, and we'll get that before the whole code council after that. Thank you.
Thanks, Kevin. So I think we're probably looking at, I mean, I want to make sure that you know, they have all the meetings they need to have, and that they have some time to work through all the material. And it does, from what I've seen, seem to be a lot on these topics, and draft up a really good summary for us. So I think we're probably looking at receiving that draft in advance of the September 17th meeting. And then we will probably be looking at whatever potential changes to the code will come out of that there or somewhere thereafter.
Mr. Chairman?
Is there Tim?
Yes, this is Tim DeRusher. Just, Kevin, I don't know if you have the list just for the communication and information for the other council members. Do you have those 13 topic items just to be able to at least say, these are the items that we've gone through thus far, and then we're still working on some of those so that there's at least an awareness of what's happening?
Sure. So
that would be very useful, I think. Thank you.
Yep. So the items today, I'll just go through them in order. There was discussion on 903.2.11.3 about the sprinkler height of 55 versus 30. Then there was discussion about heat detection and alarm connection to multiple station smoke alarms for attached garages. We also have, running through the list here, number 3, we have information about why the deletion of emergency responder radio coverage in existing buildings, the deletion of mobile fueling operations. There were several exceptions to ICC language for fire partitions when they are or not required that were deleted. Fire command center sizing charts, and I believe those 2 ended up being errata-based items that have since been addressed. The next item was whether or not updating to the current sprinkler standards for Nfpa 13, 13R, 13D, 14, 20, 24, and 72, updating to the 2019 versions versus the versions that are currently in the code. Number 8 was the townhouse sprinkler discussion that I just spoke about. Number 9 is provisions for new bed and breakfast requiring residential sprinkler protection. Number 10 is the use of 10-year battery backups and smoke detectors. Number 11 is notification for requiring of interconnection of new smoke alarms via wireless technology. Number 13 is updating reference standard NFPA 72 to use the 7th edition of UL 217 regarding smoke alarms and the 8th edition of UL 268 regarding smoke detectors. And then the final 13 item would have been the performance code.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Kevin. Are there any other questions or comments for Kevin? Okay. Hearing none, that moves us to agenda item 7, public comment period. Kevin, do we have anyone lined up to speak to the council today?
I did not receive any notification of anyone wanting to speak, and I've been monitoring the chat and have not received any chats as well.
Okay. I'm going to very slowly give it a second here. Okay. Kevin, thumbs up. Move on.
All set.
All set. Okay, moving to agenda item 8, announcement of future meetings. So the next meeting of the Code Council will be June 25th, 10 a.m. That's a Friday, because for some reason we like Friday meetings. Don't ask me. The one after that is currently scheduled for September 17th, and the final one of the year is scheduled for December 3rd as of right now. After a few years ago where we didn't hit a single date that we set, I'm going to very much try and hit those dates, because getting an alternate date with 15 of us is never easy. That takes us to agenda item 9, other business. I know of no other business to come before the council today. Kevin Peniota, am I correct in that assumption?
I don't have anything.
Correct.
Okay. All right, before we adjourn, I want to wish everybody a safe and healthy spring. I know that's my mantra now. While there is an ever-growing light at the end of the tunnel here, to everyone within the sound of my voice, please continue to wear your masks and socially distance, because the life you've saved might be mine, or the life I saved might be yours. Thank you for bearing with me today. I know that this is a tough medium to hold a meeting. I think we've actually become pretty adept at it. It's almost a shame to give it up, but I look forward to giving it up. Special thank you to staff. As repeating some of my colleagues, I know that staff worked really diligently with MTA and many others to get that rail station rulemaking ready, and it was a race the last month or so. So good work, Kevin. Good work, everyone. Thank you. So with that, and hearing nothing else that needs to come before us, I'll make a motion to adjourn. Can I have a second, please?
Second.
Second.
Tim and Dave both second the motion. All in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Does anybody want to keep going? All right, hearing none, we are adjourned. I'll see you all in June, and hopefully in person. Thank you all.
Bye.